close your eyes now and let your breathing become slow and gentle, feeling the soft rise and fall of your chest as you settle into this quiet moment, this sacred space where the ancient world opens before you, like a flower blooming in starlight, where time itself becomes fluid and dreamlike, flowing backward through the centuries and millennia to touch the very beginning of human memory, to those distant days when the sky and earth first learned to speak to one another through beings of light and wisdom. Let each breath carry away the concerns of your day, releasing them like seeds on a warm evening breeze, watching them drift away into the gathering dusk where they dissolve into nothing, leaving only peace, only stillness, only the quiet readiness to receive these ancient stories that have waited so long to be told again under the blanket of night. Feel your body becoming heavier now, sinking deeper into comfort, your muscles releasing their tension one by one, starting with your feet and moving upward through your legs, your hips, your spine, your shoulders, your neck, your face, until every part of you is completely relaxed, completely at ease, floating on the gentle current of this narrative that flows like the Euphrates itself, eternal and unhurried, carrying you toward the realm of dreams. In the time before time was counted, when the earth was young and covered in mist and mystery, the sky above Mesopotamia stretched vast and deep, scattered with stars that shone with a brilliance impossible to imagine now, each pinpoint of light a sun in its own right, blazing across distances so immense that their light took thousands upon thousands of years to reach the waiting earth below. Among those stars, circling through the darkness of space on paths that had been set since the first moment of creation, moved planets that ancient peoples would come to know by name, watching their stately procession across the dome of heaven, marking the seasons by their movements, reading messages in their alignments. And from beyond these familiar wanderers, from a place in the cosmic depths where the light of our sun barely reaches, there came travellers, beings who had mastered the secrets of the heavens, who understood the mathematics of stars and the architecture of space itself. These were the Anunnaki, whose name means those who came from heaven to earth, whose arrival marked the beginning of a new chapter in the unfolding story of our world. Imagine them now in your mind's eye, descending through layers of atmosphere, through clouds that parted before them, like curtains drawing back to reveal a stage, coming down toward the fertile land between two great rivers that flowed with the patience of eternity itself. The land they found below was wild and beautiful, untouched by the hand of civilization, covered in reeds that whispered secrets to the wind, dotted with palm trees that swayed in gentle rhythms, crossed by waterways that sparkled under the sun and moon like ribbons of liquid silver and gold. The Tigris and Euphrates ran through this landscape with purposeful grace, their waters fresh and life-giving, fed by distant mountains whose snow-capped peaks caught the first and last light of each day, glowing pink and orange against the darkening blue of evening. Along these riverbanks, marshlands spread in vast expanses, home to countless birds whose songs filled the air at dawn and dusk, whose wings flashed white and grey and brown against the green backdrop of vegetation. Here in these wetlands, fish swam in schools so large they darkened the water, and lotus flowers opened their petals to the morning sun, their fragrance drifting on the breeze like incense from an unseen temple. This was the land the Anunnaki chose, drawn by its abundance, its position beneath open skies, its potential to become something magnificent. Their leader, whose wisdom was deeper than the ocean, and whose knowledge encompassed secrets that would take humanity millennia to rediscover, was called Enki, Lord of the Earth, master of the sweet waters that flow beneath the ground, keeper of the me, those divine principles and powers that govern all aspects of existence. Enki looked upon the pristine wilderness of Mesopotamia and saw not what it was but what it could become, envisioning gardens and cities, temples that would reach toward the stars, ziggurats built in careful steps that would serve as stairways between heaven and earth, meeting places where divine and mortal could commune. His eyes were kind and ancient, reflecting depths of compassion earned through ages of existence, and his voice when he spoke carried the resonance of deep waters, of underground streams that flow in darkness, nourishing roots and feeding wells, sustaining life from hidden places. Enki established his dwelling in the Abzu, the primordial underground ocean of fresh water that was thought to lie beneath the earth's surface, that mysterious realm where all rivers had their source, where the foundations of the world rested on eternal springs that never ran dry. In this place of deep waters and deeper mysteries, Enki made his temple, his sanctuary, his workshop where the work of creation would be refined and perfected. Breathe slowly now, feeling yourself drifting deeper into relaxation with each gentle exhale, imagining yourself standing on the bank of an ancient river at twilight, watching the water flow past in its eternal journey, its surface reflecting the first stars that begin to appear in the darkening sky. Feeling the warm breeze that carries the scent of river plants and distant flowers, hearing the soft sounds of water lapping against reed beds, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface, the calling of night birds as they settle into their roosts. Let this peaceful scene fill your awareness, washing away any remaining thoughts of the modern world, any lingering tension or worry, until there is nothing but this ancient moment, this timeless now where past and present blur together like watercolours running on wet paper, creating new patterns, new possibilities, new ways of seeing and being. With Enki came others of the Anunnaki, each with their own gifts and purposes, their own roles to play in the grand design that was slowly being revealed. There was Enlil, lord of the air and storms, whose authority was vast and whose decisions carried the weight of law itself, who dwelled in the city of Nippur, which would become the spiritual heart of Sumer, the place where heaven and earth were thought to be bound together by invisible threads of cosmic significance. Enlil brought order and structure, establishing hierarchies and systems, creating the framework within which civilization could grow and flourish. His presence was like the wind itself, sometimes gentle and refreshing, at other times powerful and transformative, but always essential, always necessary, always moving things forward along their destined paths. And there was Ninhursag, the great mother goddess, lady of the mountain, she who gives birth, whose nurturing care encompassed all living things, whose touch brought fertility to soil and womb alike, whose wisdom in matters of life and growth was unmatched among all the Anunnaki. She worked alongside Enki in the creation of living beings, lending her knowledge of flesh and bone, of blood and breath, of the mysterious spark that separates the living from the non-living, that animates clay and makes it walk and speak and dream. Among the Anunnaki there shone one whose beauty was legendary, whose presence brought light and joy wherever she went, whose laughter was like music, and whose tears could break the hardest heart. This was Inanna, goddess of love and beauty, of passion and desire, of the evening star that blazes in the western sky after sunset, and the morning star that announces the coming dawn. Inanna was young among the gods, filled with curiosity and ambition, eager to explore all aspects of existence, to taste every experience that life could offer. She adorned herself with jewels that caught the light and scattered it in rainbow patterns, wore robes of finest linen dyed in precious colours, walked through gardens where every flower seemed to bloom more brightly in her presence. Her temples would become places of great beauty, decorated with the finest arts and crafts that human hands could produce, filled with music and poetry, where the sacred and sensual merged into expressions of divine love. Inanna taught humanity about the power of attraction, the mystery of union, the creativity that flows from the joining of opposites, the necessity of both love and loss in the great cycle of existence. As you lie here listening, let your imagination drift through these ancient scenes, seeing the Anunnaki walking through reed-filled marshes, their feet leaving no prints on the soft earth, their forms sometimes solid and sometimes seeming to shimmer like heat waves rising from sun-warmed stone, as though they existed on a slightly different plane of reality, visible but not entirely of this world. Picture Enki kneeling beside a quiet pool in the Abzu, his fingers trailing through water that glows with faint phosphorescence, studying the reflection of stars on its surface, reading messages in their patterns, understanding connections and relationships that span vast distances of space and time. See him gathering clay from the banks of the Euphrates, clay that has been deposited there over countless centuries, that contains within it minerals and elements from the mountains, from rocks worn down by wind and water, from the very bones of the earth itself. Clay that is reddish-brown like the soil of Mesopotamia, smooth and cool and receptive, waiting to receive the imprint of divine intention. The creation of humanity, as the ancient stories tell it, was born from necessity and compassion intertwined, a solution to a problem and an act of love simultaneously. The Anunnaki had come to Earth with purposes that required labour, tasks that needed to be accomplished, work that was demanding and endless. They needed workers to dig irrigation channels that would control the flooding rivers and bring water to distant fields, to build temples and palaces from brick and stone, to tend gardens and harvest grain, to mine precious metals from deep within the earth. For a time, the lesser Anunnaki, those of lower rank, performed these tasks themselves, but the work was hard and they grew weary, their complaints rising like smoke to reach the ears of the great gods who dwelled in their high places. Enki, whose wisdom encompassed all knowledge of life and its creation, proposed a solution that was both practical and profound. He would create a new being, a creature made from the clay of earth, but infused with something of the divine, capable of consciousness and speech, able to learn and reason and dream, who could take on the burden of labour and also serve as companions and worshippers, who could appreciate the beauty of creation and add their own creativity to its ongoing unfoldment. In the quiet workshop of the Abzu, in that sacred space beneath the world where fresh waters murmur in eternal darkness, Enki began the work of creation, with the care and attention of a master artist approaching his finest work. He took the clay, feeling its texture between his fingers, understanding its composition at a level beyond mere physical analysis, reading in it the potential for transformation, the latent possibility of life. The clay was mixed with the blood of a god who had volunteered for this purpose, whose divine essence would be the catalyst that elevated mere mud into something capable of bearing consciousness, that mysterious gift that allows a being not just to exist but to know that it exists, to contemplate its own existence, to wonder about its origins and purpose and destiny. This mixture of earth and heaven, of matter and spirit, was shaped with infinite patience into a form that mirrored the Anunnaki themselves, upright and beautiful, with hands capable of delicate manipulation, with eyes that could see beauty and meaning, with minds that could learn and remember and imagine, with hearts that could feel the full range of emotions from sorrow to joy. Ninhursag worked alongside Enki in this creation, her knowledge of the feminine mysteries of birth and growth essential to the process. She understood how to make flesh that could heal itself, how to design bodies that could reproduce and thus perpetuate themselves without need for constant divine intervention, how to build in resilience and adaptability so that these new beings could survive and thrive in changing conditions. Together, Enki and Ninhursag formed 7 male and 7 female humans in that first creation, each one shaped with care, each one receiving the breath of life that set their hearts beating, that filled their lungs with air, that opened their eyes to see the world for the first time with wonder and innocence, like newborns who have yet to learn fear or judgment, who perceive everything as fresh and miraculous and full of infinite possibility. Let yourself sink deeper now into this dream of ancient creation, imagining that moment when the first humans open their eyes, seeing the faces of their creators bending over them with expressions of hope and pride and tenderness, hearing the first words spoken to them in a language that seemed to arise in their minds even as they heard it with their ears, a language that would become Sumerian, the first written language in human history, whose wedge-shaped characters pressed into soft clay tablets would preserve for future generations the stories and wisdom and practical knowledge of the ancient world. These first humans stood on uncertain legs, feeling the earth solid beneath their feet, feeling the air on their skin, turning their faces upward to see the sky stretching above them in infinite blue expanse, dotted with clouds that drifted in stately procession, shaped by winds into forms that resembled animals and mountains and abstract patterns that spoke to something deep within the newly awakened human consciousness. Enki took these first humans to the surface world, leading them up from the depths of the Abzu through hidden passages and waterways, emerging finally into the golden light of a Mesopotamian dawn, that magical hour when the sun first breaks over the eastern horizon and everything is touched with rose and amber and soft gold, when the shadows are long and cool and the air is still fresh from the night, carrying the scent of dew on vegetation, the perfume of flowers opening their petals to greet the new day. He showed them the rivers and taught them the names of things, pointing to the palm trees and the reeds, to the fish that swam in the shallows and the birds that nested in the marshes, to the wild grains that grew in scattered patches, seeds that would eventually be cultivated and developed into the wheat and barley that would sustain civilization. He taught them how to make fire, that transformative element that would lift humanity above the animals, providing warmth and protection, enabling the cooking of food and the firing of pottery, the smelting of metals and the creation of tools. Fire became sacred to early humans, its flames a visible reminder of divine gift, tended carefully in temple hearths that were never allowed to go out, symbolizing the eternal nature of the connection between heaven and earth, between gods and humans. In those early days, the relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity was close and intimate, with the gods walking among their creations, teaching and guiding, sharing knowledge slowly and carefully, watching to see how these new beings would develop, what they would do with the gifts they had been given. The humans learned quickly, their minds sharp and curious, their hands skillful, their hearts eager to please their creators and to make their own mark on the world. They learned to weave baskets from reeds, creating containers that could hold grain and fruit, that could carry water from river to settlement, that could serve 1,000 useful purposes. They learned to shape pottery from clay, discovering through patient experimentation how different mixtures and firing times produced different results, how to create vessels that were both functional and beautiful, decorated with geometric patterns and later with images of animals and humans and gods, each pot a small work of art, a testament to the creative spark that had been gifted to humanity, along with consciousness itself. Breathe deeply and slowly, feeling your body completely relaxed now, every muscle soft and loose, your mind drifting in that pleasant space between waking and sleeping, where images and stories flow together like streams merging into a river, where the boundaries between imagination and memory become fluid and permeable, where ancient history and personal dream weave themselves into a seamless tapestry of meaning. Let yourself float on the current of this story, no longer trying to remember or understand, simply allowing the words to wash over you like gentle waves on a peaceful shore, their rhythm soothing and constant, their message absorbed not through intellectual effort but through the deeper knowing of the heart and soul. The Anunnaki established cities in the land between the rivers, places that would become legendary in human memory, whose names would echo down through millennia carrying resonances of glory and wisdom and divine connection. Eridu was the first, built at the edge of the marshlands where fresh water and salt water met and mixed, where Enki established his primary temple, the Iabzu, House of the Cosmic Waters, a ziggurat that rose in careful tiers toward the sky, each level slightly smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pyramid that could be climbed by priests and priestesses who served as intermediaries between the earthly and heavenly realms. The temple was built of mud brick, that fundamental building material of Mesopotamia, made from the very clay that had given birth to humanity, each brick formed in wooden moulds and dried in the fierce sun until it was hard enough to stack, then mortared together with bitumen that bubbled up from natural seeps in the earth, sticky and waterproof and smelling of ancient organic matter, transformed by pressure and time into something new and useful. From Eridu, civilization spread northward along the rivers, new cities rising like flowers after spring rain, each one becoming a center of culture and religion, each one dedicated to particular gods who took special interest in their development and protection. Uruk grew mighty under the patronage of Inanna, its walls encompassing great areas, its temples magnificent, its kings renowned for their wisdom and strength. Here the first true urban life emerged, with specialized craftspeople and merchants, with scribes who kept records and scholars who studied the heavens, with poets who composed hymns and epics that celebrated gods and heroes, with musicians who played lyres and flutes and drums, filling the evening air with sounds that drifted across the city like audible incense, like prayers made tangible through vibration and melody. Nippur became the religious center of Sumer, home to Enlil's great temple, the Eka or mountain house, where the tablets of destiny were kept, those mysterious objects that were said to contain the fates of all beings, the predetermined patterns of existence written in divine script that only the highest gods could read and understand. Pilgrims came to Nippur from all the cities of Sumer, travelling by foot and by boat, bringing offerings and prayers, seeking blessings and oracles, participating in festivals that marked the turning of the seasons and the cycles of agricultural life. The temple precincts bustled with activity. priests in linen robes performing rituals according to ancient formulas, temple servants sweeping courtyards and filling offering bowls with dates and barley and beer, scribes sitting cross-legged in shaded alcoves copying sacred texts onto fresh clay tablets, their styluses moving with practiced precision to create the distinctive wedge shapes of cuneiform writing. Each sign a combination of meaning and sound, a code that preserved human thought across time. Imagine yourself walking through these ancient cities at the height of their glory, moving through narrow streets lined with mud brick houses, their walls painted white to reflect the harsh sun, their flat roofs serving as additional living spaces where families slept on hot summer nights, where they dried fruits and grain, where they sat in the evening to catch the breeze and watch the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. The streets are busy with life, merchants calling out their wares, offering fresh fish from the morning's catch, baskets of dates and figs, bolts of woven cloth, pottery in various shapes and sizes, tools of copper and bronze that gleam in the sunlight. Children run and play, their laughter bright and carefree, while old men sit in doorways discussing philosophy and politics, remembering the days of their youth when everything seemed more certain and the gods walked more obviously among their people. Women draw water from wells, balancing heavy jars on their shoulders or heads, their movements graceful from long practice, their conversations flowing as steadily as the water they carry, sharing news and gossip, discussing marriages and births, deaths and scandals, the eternal human concerns that transcend culture and epoch. As evening approaches and the fierce heat of the day begins to moderate, the city takes on a different character, softer and more magical, the harsh lines of buildings melting into shadow, oil lamps beginning to glow in windows and doorways, their flickering light creating patterns that dance on walls and streets. From the temples comes the sound of evening prayers, chanted in unison by priests whose voices blend into a powerful harmony that seems to rise up and fill the entire sky, reaching toward the stars themselves with humanity's eternal message of devotion and need, of gratitude and supplication, of wonder at the mystery of existence and humble acknowledgement of forces greater than ourselves. The smell of incense drifts on the evening breeze, mixing with the cooking fires where families prepare the evening meal, with the green smell of the gardens that surround many houses, carefully tended plots where herbs and vegetables grow, where flowers bloom and trees provide shade and fruit, where the artificial and natural blend into a sustainable urban ecosystem that has learned to work with the constraints and possibilities of the desert environment. The night sky above these ancient cities was spectacular beyond modern comprehension, unpolluted by artificial light, crystal clear in the dry desert air, showing the river of the Milky Way flowing across the heavens like a celestial counterpart to the earthly rivers below, its countless stars creating a band of soft light that was said to be the road the gods travelled. The planets moved against this stellar backdrop, their positions carefully tracked by priest astronomers who spent long nights on temple rooftops, making observations and calculations, recording their findings on clay tablets that would eventually become the foundation of mathematical astronomy, of the zodiac and astrology, of the measurement of time itself into hours and minutes and degrees. These ancient watchers of the sky saw patterns and meanings everywhere, understanding the heavens as a vast message board where the gods communicated their intentions, where the future could be read by those with knowledge and wisdom to interpret the signs correctly. Let your breathing become slower still, each inhale gentle and effortless, each exhale releasing more tension, more thought, more connection to the waking world, allowing yourself to drift deeper into this ancient dream, this timeless story that is being told for you alone in this quiet moment, this sacred space between day and night, between consciousness and sleep. Feel yourself becoming part of the story, not as an observer, but as a participant, walking those ancient streets, feeling the warm evening breeze on your skin, hearing the distant chanting and the nearby murmur of voices, smelling the complex mixture of scents that defined urban life in ancient Mesopotamia. Let yourself belong to that world for this time, letting go of your modern identity and concerns, becoming simply a soul experiencing the beauty and wonder of human civilization in its first flowering, when everything was new and magical and full of divine presence. The relationship between humanity and the Anunnaki evolved over generations, becoming more distant as humans learned to manage their own affairs, as cities grew and populations multiplied, as human kings began to rule with authority derived from but separate from direct divine command. The gods retreated gradually from daily involvement in human life, appearing less frequently in physical form, communicating more often through dreams and visions, through oracles and omens, through the interpretations of priests who specialized in reading the will of heaven from the patterns of oil on water, from the flight of birds, from the shapes of livers taken from sacrificed animals, from countless other signs and portents that required expertise to understand correctly. Yet the connection remained. The bond between heaven and earth never completely severed, maintained through ritual and prayer, through the building and maintenance of temples, through the proper observation of festivals and holy days, through the complex system of offerings and sacrifices that flowed from earth to heaven in a constant stream of devotion and reciprocity. Among the Anunnaki, there were stories of deeper mysteries, of hidden knowledge that was not shared with humanity, of secrets that pertained to the true nature of reality, to the origins of the cosmos itself, to the forces and principles that governed existence at its most fundamental level. These secrets were encoded in the Me, those divine attributes and powers that Enki guarded so carefully in the Abzu, that Inanna famously tricked him into giving her when she visited his underwater realm and plied him with beer until his judgment was impaired, and he agreed to bestow upon her the Me of kingship, of priesthood, of music and art, of sexual pleasure and sacred prostitution, of warfare and peacemaking, of all the countless aspects of civilized existence. The story of how Inanna obtained these Me and brought them to Uruk, fleeing in her boat while Enki, having sobered up and realized what he had done, sent monsters and storms to pursue her and reclaim what he had given away. This story speaks to the complex relationships among the gods themselves, to their very human-seeming emotions and conflicts, their capacity for jealousy and regret, for generosity and calculation. Inanna's journey to the underworld is another tale that reveals the depth and complexity of Sumerian theology, the understanding that existence encompasses not just the world of light and life but also the dark realm below, the land of no return where the dead dwell in shadowy existence, where dust is their bread and clay their food, where they flutter about like birds in a vast cavern that never sees the sun. Inanna descended to this realm to visit her sister Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, passing through 7 gates, at each one required to remove some article of clothing or jewellery, each removal stripping away a layer of power and protection until she arrived naked and vulnerable before her sister's throne. There she was, struck dead, and hung from a hook like meat in a slaughterhouse, her corpse beginning to rot and decay in that place where nothing lives. But Enki, ever wise and resourceful, created beings from the dirt beneath his fingernails, creatures neither male nor female, neither alive nor dead, who could pass freely into the underworld without triggering its laws and restrictions. These creatures brought food and water from the land of the living, resurrected Inanna with the bread and water of life, enabling her to escape and return to the upper world, though not without cost, for the laws of the underworld demanded a substitute, and eventually her lover Dumuzi was taken in her place, condemned to spend half the year in darkness while she mourned his absence. Her grief reflected in the death of vegetation, the coming of winter, the annual cycle of loss and renewal that would be celebrated in ritual and remembered in myth for thousands of years. These stories, told and retold around evening fires, recorded on clay tablets in the libraries of ancient cities, speak to the human understanding of existence as cyclical rather than linear, as characterized by patterns that repeat endlessly: birth and death, growth and decay, absence and presence, sorrow and joy, each phase necessary and valuable, each transition a sacred mystery to be honored and celebrated. The agricultural societies of ancient Mesopotamia lived close to these cycles, their survival dependent on understanding and working with the rhythms of nature, the flooding of the rivers that brought fertile silt to the fields, the growing seasons that demanded planting at correct times, the harvest that required intense labour when the grain was ready, the fallow periods when the earth rested and recovered its strength. The gods themselves were understood to participate in these cycles, to be affected by them, to die and be reborn, to withdraw and return, mirroring in the divine realm the patterns that governed earthly existence. Allow your mind to drift now through images of harvest time in ancient Sumer, seeing the fields of barley turning golden under the late summer sun, ready to be cut and gathered, the grain that would sustain life through the coming year, that would be ground into flour and baked into bread, brewed into beer, offered to the gods and consumed by humans, the fundamental staff of life, the gift of the earth made possible through human labour and divine blessing working in harmony. See the workers moving through the fields with sickles, cutting the grain stalks close to the ground, binding them into sheaves that are loaded onto carts pulled by patient oxen, animals that had been domesticated generations earlier that now worked alongside humans as partners in the great enterprise of civilization. Hear the songs the workers sing to pace their labour, to maintain rhythm and coordination, songs that tell of gods and heroes, that celebrate the abundance of the harvest, that express gratitude for the fertility of the earth and the favour of heaven, that turn work into worship, labour into liturgy, transforming the physical act of harvesting into something sacred and meaningful. The threshing floor becomes a place of community gathering, where the grain is separated from the chaff through the action of wooden sledges dragged over the piled stalks by animals walking in circles, around and around in a pattern as old as agriculture itself, a meditation in motion, a circular dance that embodies the cyclical nature of existence. The chaff is blown away by the wind, the grain collected and stored in massive jars or in granaries built to protect it from moisture and rodents, surplus that represents security, that enables cities to exist, that allows some people to specialise in crafts and scholarship, rather than spending all their time in food production, that makes possible the complex hierarchical society with its kings and priests, its merchants and artisans, its scribes and soldiers, all supported ultimately by the bounty of the earth and the labour of those who work it. In the temples, the harvest is celebrated with great festivals, days of feasting and ceremony, where the first fruits of the harvest are offered to the gods, where special breads are baked and special beers brewed, where music and dancing go on for days, where the boundaries between sacred and profane, between divine and human, seem to dissolve in the shared joy of abundance and survival, in the collective relief that another year's food has been secured, that starvation will not claim the people, that life will continue. These festivals were not merely celebrations, but essential acts of reciprocity, humans giving back to the gods who had given to them, maintaining the cosmic order through proper ritual action, through the performance of rites that had been established in the beginning times, that connected present reality to mythic origins, that renewed the world through symbolic reenactment of creation itself. The concept of the divine bloodline is central to understanding the relationship between the Anunnaki and human civilization as it developed over centuries and millennia. According to the ancient texts and traditions, certain humans were selected by the gods to serve as intermediaries, as kings who would rule on earth with divine authority, whose legitimacy came not from human choice or military power alone, but from heavenly sanction, from a special relationship with the gods that might even involve actual bloodline descent. The mixing of divine and human essences to create hybrid beings who embodied both realms, who could move between heaven and earth, who were more than human but less than fully divine. These divine kings were said to possess special wisdom and longevity, to have lived for impossibly long lifespans that spanned centuries, perhaps a mythological way of expressing the continuity of royal lines, the persistence of dynasties, or perhaps preserving some memory of actual genetic manipulation by the Anunnaki, of tweaking human biology to create rulers who were stronger, smarter, longer lived than ordinary humans. The Sumerian king list, that fascinating document that purports to record the succession of rulers from the time before the Great Flood down to historical periods, begins with kings who reigned for tens of thousands of years, figures that defy rational interpretation, but that speak to a time that was understood as qualitatively different from the present, an age when the gods were more present, when the rules of existence were not quite the same as they would later become, when the boundary between myth and history had not yet been drawn. These antediluvian kings ruled from cities that the flood would eventually sweep away, cities whose names carry an echo of immense antiquity, whose remains, if they ever existed as physical places, lie buried under meters of silt deposited by countless floods over thousands of years, perhaps lost forever to archaeology, existing only in the preserved memories of texts copied and recopied by scribes who themselves lived millennia after the events they recorded. Let yourself drift deeper now into the timeless quality of these ancient stories, releasing any need to distinguish between history and myth, between fact and legend, allowing them simply to exist as stories, as narratives that carried meaning and truth for the people who told them, that shaped their understanding of themselves and their world, that provided framework and context for their existence, that answered the fundamental questions every culture must address about origins and purposes, about the relationship between humanity and the cosmos, about the sources of authority and the nature of the good life. These stories are gifts from the distant past, preserved against all odds through the dedication of countless scribes and scholars, through the accident of clay tablets surviving where paper and papyrus would have crumbled to dust, giving us a window into the minds and hearts of people who lived when the world was young, who looked up at the same stars we see but interpreted them through completely different frameworks, who experienced the same fundamental human emotions we still feel, but expressed them in languages we have only recently learned to read again after thousands of years of silence. The great flood that features so prominently in Mesopotamian mythology, that would eventually be incorporated into biblical tradition, and thus influence Western civilization for millennia, was remembered as a catastrophic event that nearly ended human civilization, that washed away the old world and necessitated a new beginning. The story tells how the gods, for reasons that vary in different versions, decided to destroy humanity with a massive flood, how they gathered in council and agreed upon this course of action, sealing their decision with oaths and agreements. But Enki, who had created humanity and felt compassion for his creations, could not bear to see them utterly destroyed. Bound by his oath to the other gods not to warn humans directly, he spoke instead to the wall of a reed house, where a man named Ziusudra was sleeping, describing in detail the coming disaster and providing instructions for survival. Ziusudra, understanding that Enki was speaking to him through the wall, obeyed, constructing a great boat according to the specifications he had been given, making it watertight with bitumen, loading it with the seeds of all plants, with breeding pairs of all animals, with his family and the craftsmen whose skills would be needed to rebuild civilization after the waters receded. The flood, when it came, was beyond imagination in its fury and scope, the heavens opening to release rain that fell for days without ceasing, the rivers overflowing their banks, the Persian Gulf surging inland in massive waves, water covering everything, rising until even the highest mountains disappeared beneath the churning surface, until there was no land visible anywhere, only endless grey water stretching to every horizon under a black sky that poured forth its contents in overwhelming abundance. The boat containing Ziusudra and his precious cargo tossed on the waves, buffeted by winds, swept this way and that by currents that had no pattern or direction, lost in a world that had become nothing but water and storm, where the familiar landmarks had all disappeared, where up and down were the only remaining directions, and even those were called into question by the violent motion of the waves. Inside the boat, in the darkness and noise, Ziusudra maintained faith, trusting in Enki's wisdom, caring for the animals and plants, keeping hope alive through the long days and nights of the deluge. Gradually, after what seemed like endless time, the rain began to slacken, the winds to moderate, the waves to subside, and one morning Ziusudra opened a hatch in the roof of the boat and saw that the sky had cleared, that the sun was shining on water that now lay calm and smooth like a mirror reflecting the blue vault of heaven. He released a dove that flew in circles and returned, finding no place to land, then after some more days a raven that flew away and did not return, sign that somewhere the waters were receding, exposing mud and eventually dry land where birds could rest and feed. Finally the boat grounded on a mountain, coming to rest as the waters drained away, revealing a world scoured clean, transformed, remade, ready for a new beginning. Ziusudra emerged into dazzling sunlight, onto a mountainside covered with fresh mud, breathing air that smelled of rain and earth and new growth, seeing the flooded plain below beginning to emerge as the waters drained back into the rivers and the sea, leaving behind rich silt that would nourish new crops, that carried within it the material for rebuilding. The gods, looking down and seeing that Ziusudra had survived, that human knowledge and animal life had been preserved, were initially angry at Enki for his deception, but eventually they accepted what had been done, recognizing perhaps that complete destruction had never been necessary, that a cleansing and renewal was sufficient, that humanity deserved another chance to fulfill its purpose and potential. Enlil himself came to the mountain where the boat had grounded blessed Ziusudra and his wife, granting them immortality and placing them to dwell at the edge of the world, at the mouth of the rivers where the waters flow into the sea, in a paradise garden where they would live forever in peace and comfort, removed from the world of mortal struggle and suffering, elevated to a status somewhere between human and divine, honoured for their faithfulness and their role in preserving life through the great catastrophe. Breathe slowly and deeply, imagining yourself in that moment after the flood, standing on clean earth under clear skies, feeling the warmth of the sun that has returned after so many dark days, seeing the world washed clean and made new, everything fresh and pristine and full of possibility. The air so pure it seems to sparkle, the light so clear that colours appear more vivid than ever before, as though reality itself has been renewed along with the physical landscape. Feel the profound peace that comes from having survived catastrophe, from being given another chance, from standing at a new beginning with the wisdom of the past still available, but with the opportunity to make different choices, to build better, to live more in harmony with divine intention and natural law. Let this feeling of renewal and fresh beginnings seep into your own consciousness, washing away any regrets or sorrows from your own past, any mistakes or failures that you carry, letting them be swept away as the flood swept away the old world, leaving you clean and new and ready to move forward into whatever future awaits. From Ziusudra and his descendants, civilization was rebuilt, cities rising again from the mud, temples reconstructed on their ancient foundations, the arts of writing and mathematics and astronomy rediscovered or remembered, passed down through the generations that had survived, preserved in the collective memory of humanity like seeds that survive the winter to germinate in spring. The world after the flood was understood as fundamentally the same as the world before, governed by the same gods, operating according to the same principles, but there was also a sense that something had changed, that the gods had drawn back somewhat, that the distance between heaven and earth had increased, that humanity was more on its own now than in the earliest times, bearing more responsibility for its own fate, given freedom that brought with it both opportunity and danger, the chance to rise to great heights, or fall to terrible depths depending on the choices made and the wisdom displayed. The cities that rose in the millennia after the flood became ever more magnificent and sophisticated, their ziggurats larger and more impressive, their irrigation systems more extensive and complex, their social structures more hierarchical and specialized, their arts more refined, their literature richer and more varied. Babylon eventually emerged as the greatest city of all, its name meaning Gate of the Gods, its Ishtar Gate decorated with brilliant blue-glazed bricks moulded into relief sculptures of dragons and bulls, its processional way leading to the great temple of Marduk, chief god of the Babylonian pantheon, whose rise to preeminence reflected the political ascendancy of Babylon itself, the tendency of gods to follow the fortunes of their cities, rising or falling in the divine hierarchy as their earthly strongholds gained or lost power in the human realm. The famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, built according to legend by King Nebuchadnezzar for his wife, who missed the mountains of her homeland, represented the height of human achievement in creating artificial paradise, in using technology and engineering to overcome the limitations of the natural environment, to bring water uphill through clever systems of screws and pulleys, to create terraced gardens rising level after level, planted with trees and flowers from all over the known world, creating shade and beauty, and the music of fountains in the midst of the hot, dusty Mesopotamian plain. Whether these gardens actually existed as described, or whether they represent an idealized dream of paradise, a mythical perfection that inspired but was never fully realized, they captured the imagination of the ancient world, becoming one of the seven wonders, a testament to what could be achieved when human ingenuity combined with adequate resources and sufficient motivation. When vision was not limited by conventional thinking about what was possible, the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a tall stone stela crowned with a relief showing the king receiving the laws from the sun god Shamash, represents another kind of achievement, the codification of justice, the attempt to create a system where disputes could be resolved according to known and published standards, rather than the arbitrary whim of the powerful, where even the humble could have recourse against injustice, where commerce could flourish because contracts would be enforced and property rights protected. The laws themselves, with their famous principle of exact reciprocity, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, strike modern readers as harsh, but they represented in their time a real advance, a limitation on the endless cycles of vengeance and blood feud that plagued societies without strong legal systems, a declaration that justice should be proportionate and predictable, that society as a whole had an interest in maintaining order and protecting its members according to established norms. As you lie here listening to these ancient tales, let your mind wander through the streets of Babylon at its height, imagining the cosmopolitan atmosphere of a city that had become the centre of a vast empire, where merchants from distant lands mingled in the marketplaces, trading goods from India and Egypt, from the Mediterranean coast and the steppes of Central Asia, where a dozen languages could be heard in the public squares, where fashions and ideas mixed and merged, where the accumulated wisdom of millennia was preserved in libraries containing thousands of clay tablets, covering every subject from mathematics to medicine, from astronomy to literature, from business contracts to sacred hymns. See the ziggurats rising above the flat rooftops of the city, their stepped sides climbing toward the sky, their summit shrines gleaming with precious metals and coloured glazes, their staircases ascending in ritual procession, priests and priestesses climbing toward heaven to perform ceremonies that maintained cosmic order, that kept the sun rising and the moon following its phases, that ensured the seasons would continue their cycle, that bound earth to heaven through the sacred technology of ritual, precisely performed according to ancient formulas that had proven their efficacy over countless generations. The hidden bloodlines that some traditions speak of, the descent of special wisdom and power through family lines that could trace their ancestry back to the Anunnaki themselves, to those early days when gods and humans intermingled more freely, when the distinction between divine and mortal was less absolute than it would later become. These bloodlines were said to carry within them genetic and spiritual inheritance that set them apart, that gave them special capacities for leadership and wisdom, for magic and prophecy, for seeing beyond the ordinary world into the hidden dimensions of reality. Kings claimed descent from gods. Priests and priestesses maintained their special status through careful marriage practices that kept their blood pure and their connection to divine sources strong. Mystery schools and secret societies preserved and transmitted knowledge that was not for the common people, that required special preparation and initiation to receive safely, that could be dangerous in the wrong hands but powerful for good when wielded by those properly trained and morally prepared. These traditions of hidden knowledge and special bloodlines would persist through the centuries and millennia, adapting to new circumstances, sometimes going underground when hostile religious or political authorities forced them into secrecy, sometimes emerging openly when conditions were favourable, but never disappearing entirely, maintaining an underground river of ancient wisdom that occasionally surfaced in various forms in the mystery schools of ancient Greece, in the Gnostic teachings of early Christianity, in the alchemical traditions of medieval Europe, in the esoteric brotherhoods of the Renaissance, in the mystical movements of every age that sought to connect with the divine through direct experience rather than through institutional mediation, that claimed access to ancient teachings passed down from the time before history, from the days when the gods walked the earth and humanity was young and the world was charged with magic and meaning. Let yourself drift now in that borderland between waking and sleeping, where rational thought gives way to dream logic, where images and ideas flow freely without the censorship of the conscious mind, where the boundaries between past and present, between self and other, between human and divine, become permeable and fluid, allowing insights and connections that waking consciousness might reject as impossible or meaningless, but that carry their own deep truth, their own inner coherence, their own message from the depths of the psyche to the surface awareness, gifts from the unconscious that enrich and inform our understanding of who we are and where we come from and what might be possible if we could only remember what we have forgotten, if we could reconnect with sources of wisdom that exist beneath the surface of modern life, that wait patiently to be rediscovered by those who seek with sincere hearts and open minds. The astronomical knowledge of ancient Mesopotamia was remarkably advanced, far beyond what we might expect from a culture so distant in time, suggesting either that they devoted enormous resources and many generations to careful observation and calculation, or possibly that they had inherited knowledge from even earlier sources, perhaps from the Anunnaki themselves if we take the myths at something like face value, perhaps from a lost civilization of which we have no direct evidence, but whose achievements were preserved in the traditions of successor cultures. The Babylonians could predict eclipses with remarkable accuracy, could calculate the positions of planets years in advance, had discovered the precession of the equinoxes, that slow wobble in the Earth's rotation that causes the position of the stars to drift slowly over thousands of years, completing a full cycle in roughly 26,000 years. A discovery that required not just careful observation, but also access to records spanning many generations, the accumulated data of centuries of patient watching and recording by countless anonymous priests who spent their nights on temple rooftops, tracking the stars and planets with nothing but their naked eyes and simple sighting instruments, yet achieving results that would not be significantly improved until the invention of the telescope thousands of years later. This astronomical knowledge was not pursued for purely practical purposes, though it certainly had practical applications in creating accurate calendars and determining the proper times for agricultural activities, but rather because the heavens were understood as the realm of the gods, because the movements of celestial bodies were read as messages and omens, because the cosmos itself was seen as a vast living system of which humanity was an integral part, connected to the stars through invisible threads of influence and meaning. The planets were identified with specific gods, Jupiter with Marduk, Venus with Inanna or Ishtar, Mars with Nergal, the god of war and plague, and their movements were interpreted as reflecting the activities and intentions of these divine beings, their conjunctions and oppositions marking significant moments when the fabric of reality became thin and malleable, when prayers and rituals would be especially effective, when important decisions should be made or avoided depending on whether the omens were favourable or threatening. The zodiac, that band of constellations through which the sun and planets move, was divided into 12 signs by the Babylonians, each sign associated with particular qualities and influences, each one occupying exactly 30 degrees of the celestial circle, a system that would be adopted by the Greeks and passed down to become the foundation of Western astrology, still used today by millions who may not realize they are following a tradition that stretches back over 4,000 years to the temple astronomers of ancient Babylon, who first mapped the heavens and assigned meanings to the patterns they saw there. The names of the signs themselves preserve ancient Sumerian words and concepts. The ram and the bull, the twins and the crab, the lion and the virgin, the scales and the scorpion, the archer and the goat, the water-bearer and the fish, each one connected to myths and stories that gave them meaning, that explained their influence, that made them part of a larger narrative about the cosmos and humanity's place within it. Feel your breathing becoming slower and deeper now, each breath carrying you further into relaxation, into that state of consciousness where sleep begins to claim you, where awareness fades gradually like the last light of sunset draining from the western sky, colours deepening from gold to orange to red to purple, to deep blue and finally to black, but a black that is not empty but rather full of potential, pregnant with dreams that wait to be born, with images and stories that will unfold in the inner theatre of the mind once consciousness has released its grip, and the unconscious is free to play out its mysterious dramas, using the material of your life and memories, and the archetypes that all humans share. Those fundamental patterns that appear in the myths and dreams of every culture, that connect us all across time and space in a common humanity that transcends the superficial differences of language and custom and belief. The legacy of the Anunnaki, whether we understand them as literal beings from another world, or as symbolic representations of natural forces or psychological realities, whether we accept the ancient stories as history or read them as mythology, this legacy persists in our civilization in ways both obvious and subtle, in our calendar and our mathematics, in our concepts of time and space, in the very foundations of urban life and organized religion, in the idea that there are forces and intelligences greater than ourselves that deserve our reverence and attention, in the sense that human beings are not merely animals but contain within themselves something of the divine, some spark or seed that connects us to higher realities, that gives us the capacity for self-transcendence, for moral choice, for creative expression, for the pursuit of meaning and purpose that goes beyond mere survival and reproduction. The cuneiform writing system invented by the Sumerians, those wedge-shaped marks pressed into soft clay with a reed stylus, represents one of the most important inventions in human history, comparable to the wheel or the control of fire in its impact on civilization. Writing enabled the preservation and transmission of knowledge across generations without relying on human memory alone, allowing the accumulation of information and wisdom over centuries, making possible complex administrative systems that could manage large populations and territories, creating literature and history and science as distinct enterprises, giving humans a way to communicate across time and space, to speak to the future in a voice that would remain audible long after the speaker had returned to dust. The earliest tablets contain lists and inventories, records of goods delivered and received, names and quantities and prices, the mundane stuff of commerce and administration. But soon the technology was adapted to more ambitious purposes, to recording hymns and prayers, to preserving myths and epics, to teaching mathematics and astronomy, to exploring ideas about justice and morality, to all the diverse uses to which written language can be put. The Epic of Gilgamesh, that magnificent poem about the adventures of a hero king who seeks immortality and ultimately learns to accept human mortality as the price of human existence, stands as one of the earliest and greatest works of world literature, its themes still resonant thousands of years after it was first composed, its questions about the meaning of life and the inevitability of death still urgent and moving. Gilgamesh begins as a proud and arrogant ruler, oppressing his people until the gods create Enkidu, a wild man who becomes Gilgamesh's friend and civilizes him through their bond of affection and loyalty. Together they have great adventures, defeating monsters and defying gods, but eventually Enkidu dies and Gilgamesh is left to confront his own mortality, terrified by the realization that he too must die, setting out on a quest to find eternal life. His journey takes him to the ends of the earth, across waters of death, to a garden of jeweled trees, to meet the one human who had survived the flood and been granted immortality, seeking the secret that would allow him to escape the common fate of all mortals. But the secret, when he finally learns it, proves impossible to keep. The plant of immortality stolen by a serpent while Gilgamesh bathes in a pool, leaving him to return home empty-handed, defeated in his quest, but somehow wiser, having learned that immortality for humans lies not in eternal physical existence, but in the works we leave behind, in the cities we build and the walls we raise, in the children we raise and the stories we tell, in the memories we create that will live on in others after we are gone. In acceptance of our mortal condition rather than futile resistance to it, in finding meaning and purpose within the limited span we are given, rather than wasting our lives in pursuit of what we cannot have. This lesson, learned by a Sumerian king thousands of years ago, remains relevant today, speaks to the fundamental human condition that has not changed despite all our technological and social progress, that continues to face the same essential questions about meaning and mortality, about how to live a good life in the knowledge that it will end, about what makes existence worthwhile despite or perhaps because of its temporary nature. Let these ancient themes wash over you now, not trying to analyze or understand them intellectually, simply allowing them to exist in your awareness like the sound of distant music or the scent of flowers carried on the wind, receiving them as gifts from the past, as connections to countless generations of humans who lived and loved and struggled and died, who asked the same questions you ask, who felt the same emotions you feel, who looked up at the same stars and wondered about their place in the vast scheme of things, who created beauty and meaning out of the raw materials of existence, who passed their wisdom down to us through stories and songs, through myths and legends, through traditions and teachings that have survived against all odds, to reach us here in this moment, in this quiet time when your body is relaxed and your mind is open and receptive to truths that cannot be learned from books or transmitted through logical argument, but must be felt and intuited, absorbed through some deeper channel that bypasses the intellectual defences we normally maintain, that reaches directly into the heart and soul where the most important knowledge resides. The great libraries of the ancient world, like the famous library at Nineveh assembled by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, contain tens of thousands of tablets covering every aspect of knowledge available at the time, from practical information about agriculture and medicine to complex mathematical and astronomical treatises, from business and legal documents to literary masterpieces and religious texts, from dictionaries and encyclopedias to personal letters and school exercises, a complete cross-section of ancient civilization preserved in clay. When these libraries were destroyed by fire, ironically the clay tablets were baked hard by the heat, preserving them better than if they had simply been abandoned to slowly disintegrate in the soil, allowing modern archaeologists to excavate them and modern scholars to read them, bringing back to life voices that had been silent for thousands of years, recovering lost epics and forgotten gods, reconstructing the daily life and thought of ancient peoples from the evidence they left behind in their own words. The process of decipherment, of learning to read languages that had not been spoken or written for millennia, represents a triumph of human ingenuity and persistence. Scholars spending decades working out the meanings of signs, comparing different texts, using bilingual inscriptions as keys to unlock monolingual ones, gradually piecing together grammar and vocabulary, making mistakes and correcting them, arguing and collaborating until finally the ancient texts could be read again, and their messages understood. This work continues today, with new tablets still being discovered, new readings proposed for old texts, new insights into ancient thought and society constantly emerging as more evidence is analysed and interpreted. In this way, the ancient Mesopotamians continue to speak to us, to share their wisdom and their stories, to show us how they understood the world and themselves, to remind us that human nature has changed less than we might think, that the concerns and questions that preoccupied them still preoccupy us, that we are not as different from these ancient people as the millennia that separate us might suggest. The sacred marriage ceremony, Hieros Gamos, performed annually in many Sumerian cities, involved the king and a high priestess enacting the union of the god and goddess, usually Dumuzi and Inanna, in a ritual that was believed to ensure the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people for the coming year. This ceremony, which took place in the temple on New Year's Day, involved elaborate preparations, processions, offerings, songs and dances, culminating in the actual sexual union of the king and priestess representing the divine couple, an act that was understood not as personal or profane but as sacred and cosmic, as participating in the same creative power that had brought the world into being, that maintained its existence and renewed its vitality, that channeled divine energy into the earthly realm through the bodies of these human representatives of heavenly archetypes. This kind of sacred sexuality, so foreign to later monotheistic traditions that would separate sharply between the sacred and the sexual, was completely natural to the ancient Mesopotamians, who saw all aspects of existence as potentially sacred, who did not divide reality into spiritual and material realms that were opposed to each other, but rather understood spirit and matter as two aspects of a unified whole, interpenetrating and mutually dependent, like two sides of a coin that cannot exist separately. As you drift closer to sleep, let your mind release its grip on these details and stories, allowing them to blend together into a general impression of ancient wisdom, of peoples who lived close to the earth and sky, who paid attention to the cycles of nature and the movements of the heavens, who created beauty and meaning in their art and architecture, who developed systems of thought and practice that helped them navigate the challenges of existence, who honoured the divine in all its manifestations, who remembered their origins and preserved their memories for future generations, who contributed to the great river of human culture that flows from the distant past through the present toward an unknown future, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom and creativity of countless lives, countless moments of insight and inspiration, countless expressions of the enduring human spirit that refuses to be crushed by circumstance, that continues to seek beauty and meaning even in the face of hardship and tragedy, that builds and creates and loves and dreams generation after generation, maintaining the continuity of civilization through times of peace and times of chaos, through rises and falls, through the endless cycle of birth and death that characterizes all life on Earth. The ziggurats themselves can be understood as architectural metaphors for the cosmic mountain, the axis mundi that connected Earth to heaven, that stood at the center of the world linking the three realms of sky, earth and underworld, providing a pathway for gods to descend and humans to ascend, a meeting place where communication and exchange could occur between different levels of reality. The ziggurat was more than a building. It was a sacred geography made tangible, a map of the cosmos rendered in brick and bitumen, its stepped sides representing the stages of ascent from earthly to divine consciousness, its summit shrine the point of connection where heaven touched earth, where the ordinary world opened onto transcendent reality. To climb a ziggurat was to undertake a symbolic journey, each level representing a stage of spiritual development, each step bringing the climber closer to the divine presence, until finally at the top, standing on the platform beneath the open sky, the priest or priestess entered the sacred precinct where the god or goddess was believed to dwell, where offerings could be made and prayers spoken with the assurance that they would be heard, where the will of heaven could be discerned and communicated back down to the waiting world below. The colours used in temple decoration were not arbitrary, but carried symbolic meanings, Lapis lazuli blue representing the heavens and the domain of the sky gods, the deep blue vault under which all earthly activity takes place. Carnelian red symbolizing blood and life force, the vital energy that animates all living things. Gold representing the sun and divine radiance, the imperishable light of consciousness itself. Silver associated with the moon and the feminine principle, the cool, reflective quality of lunar light that illuminates the night without the harsh brilliance of day. These colours were expensive to produce, requiring materials that had to be imported from distant lands. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, gold and silver mined from mountains and panned from rivers, their very costliness making them appropriate for sacred use, demonstrating through the investment of wealth and effort the seriousness of devotion, the willingness to give the best to the gods who had given everything to humanity. The music that filled the temples during ceremonies, played on lyres and harps, flutes and drums, singing voices raised in unison or harmony. This music was understood as having real power, as being able to affect consciousness and reality, to open doors between worlds, to invoke divine presence, to heal or harm depending on the melodies and rhythms employed, the modes and scales chosen, the intentions of the musicians and the skill with which they performed. The ancient world was much more aware than the modern world of the power of sound, of vibration and resonance, of the way certain tones and combinations could induce specific states of consciousness, could facilitate trance and ecstasy, could carry the mind beyond ordinary awareness into realms of vision and insight. The hymns and chants preserved on clay tablets give us the words but not the melodies. Those have been lost to time, but we can imagine them, can reconstruct something of what they might have sounded like based on what we know of ancient instruments and music theory, can hear in our minds the voices of long-dead singers praising gods whose worship has ceased, whose temples have crumbled to dust, but whose names we still remember, whose stories we still tell, whose influence on human culture persists even when their cult has vanished. Breathe slowly, deeply, peacefully, feeling yourself floating in a timeless space where past and present merge, where you are simultaneously here in this moment and also there in ancient Mesopotamia, standing in a temple courtyard as evening falls, watching the priests ascend the ziggurat for evening prayers, hearing the chants and bells, smelling the incense that rises in fragrant clouds, seeing the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the sky, feeling the presence of something vast and mysterious and beautiful that encompasses all of existence, that holds you safely in its awareness, that knows you completely and loves you unconditionally, that wishes only your peace and happiness and fulfillment, that guides you gently towards sleep and dreams, toward rest and renewal, toward the deep healing that comes when consciousness releases its grip and the body is allowed to perform its restorative work in the dark hours of the night, when nothing is required of you, when you can simply be, simply exist, simply float in the ocean of being without effort or striving, without goal or purpose beyond being itself, beyond the pure experience of existence that needs no justification, no explanation, no reason beyond its own intrinsic nature. The concept of destiny or fate, written in the stars and recorded in the tablets of destiny kept in the great temple of Nippur, suggests a universe that is not random or chaotic but ordered and meaningful, where every event has its place in a larger pattern, where everything happens for a reason even if that reason is not immediately apparent, where the gods themselves are bound by laws and principles that even they cannot violate, where free will and predestination somehow coexist in a paradox that cannot be resolved through logic but can be lived and experienced, where humans make real choices that have real consequences, but within a framework that limits and shapes those choices, that provides the context within which freedom operates. This understanding of fate was not fatalistic in the sense of passive resignation, but rather encouraged active engagement with life, an attitude of working with destiny rather than against it, of seeking to understand and align with the patterns of one's own life rather than fighting uselessly against them, of finding the freedom that exists within necessity, the creativity that flourishes within constraints, the way a river creates beauty by working with gravity and geology, finding the path of least resistance, shaping itself to the landscape while simultaneously shaping the landscape to itself over time. The Garden of the Gods, that paradise that existed at the beginning of time and that would be recreated in various forms throughout history, from the hanging gardens of Babylon to the Persian paradise gardens, with their geometrical layouts and flowing water, to the gardens of medieval monasteries and Islamic palaces, this archetypal image of perfect nature cultivated by human care, of the wild and the civilized in perfect harmony, represents the goal of human existence as understood by many ancient traditions: the return to Eden, the recovery of innocence, the healing of the split between humanity and nature, between consciousness and instinct, between reason and emotion, between all the various dualities that characterize human experience as we know it, but that were not present in the beginning, that came later as a result of whatever fall from grace or departure from original unity. The myths of various cultures describe in their different ways. Let yourself rest now in the garden of your imagination, a place of complete safety and beauty, where the temperature is perfect and the light is soft and golden, where flowers bloom in profusion and trees provide gentle shade, where water flows in clear streams and collects in tranquil pools, where birds sing sweetly and butterflies dance on the breeze, where you can lie on soft grass and look up through the leaves at the sky, feeling the earth solid and supportive beneath you, feeling the air caress your skin, smelling the mingled fragrances of jasmine and roses, of herbs and fresh-cut grass, of water and earth and growing things, hearing the peaceful sounds of nature undisturbed by human noise, by traffic and machinery, by the constant stimulation of modern life, just the simple eternal sounds that have been heard since the beginning of time, that connect you to all the humans who have ever lived, who have lain on the earth looking up at the sky, who have felt the same sun on their faces and breathed the same air, who have been born and lived and died in the same world that holds you now, that will continue to hold countless others after you're gone. The eternal earth that receives all and sustains all and eventually reclaims all, the mother to which we all return. The transition from nomadic to settled existence, from hunting and gathering to agriculture and permanent habitation, was not immediate or universal, but occurred gradually over many generations, with some groups making the change earlier and others later, with periods of experimentation and adaptation, with successes and failures, with innovations that were adopted and spread, and others that were tried and abandoned. The first permanent settlements in Mesopotamia appeared around 10,000 years ago, simple clusters of mud brick houses occupied by people who were learning to cultivate wild wheat and barley, who were beginning to domesticate animals, who were developing pottery for storage and cooking, who were creating the material foundation for civilization, even though they could not have imagined what their innovations would eventually lead to, how the simple decision to plant seeds and wait for harvest, rather than following wild herds and gathering wild plants, would transform human existence so completely, creating the conditions for everything that would follow, for cities and writing, for art and science, for organized religion and political structures, for all the achievements and all the problems of civilized life. The Ubaid period, named after the site where its characteristic pottery was first identified, represents the first widespread settled culture in Mesopotamia, lasting from around 6500 to 3800 BCE, a time of slowly increasing population, of the establishment of permanent villages that would eventually grow into cities, of the development of irrigation technology that allowed reliable agriculture in the hot, dry climate, of trade networks that brought exotic materials from distant regions, of religious practices centered on temple structures that show surprising continuity with later Sumerian practice, suggesting that many fundamental aspects of Mesopotamian civilization were already being established in this early period, that Sumer did not appear suddenly but grew organically out of earlier developments, that the Anunnaki, if we want to preserve that language, did not arrive all at once, but revealed themselves gradually, working through human agency and natural development rather than imposing civilization from outside, which is perhaps a more sophisticated way of understanding divine action. Not as arbitrary intervention, but as the gradual unfolding of potential, according to laws and principles that themselves reflect divine wisdom and intention. Feel your consciousness beginning to fragment now, thoughts becoming less coherent, images appearing and disappearing without logical connection, the normal boundaries of self becoming fuzzy and permeable as sleep approaches, as the waking mind releases its control and the dreaming mind begins to stir, as the ego loosens its grip and the deeper layers of the psyche rise toward the surface, bringing with them material that has been hidden during the day, memories and desires, fears and hopes, archetypes and symbols that speak in the language of dreams, that communicate through images and emotions rather than words and logic, that reveal truths that cannot be spoken directly but must be experienced, must be felt rather than thought, must be allowed to affect us without our understanding exactly how or why, must be received as gifts even when we do not understand their meaning or their source. The stars continue their ancient dance overhead, the same stars that the Anunnaki knew, that guided travellers and marked the seasons, that inspired poetry and mathematics, that still shine with the light that left them thousands of years ago, travelling through space to reach your eyes this very night. Photons that began their journey in the reign of ancient kings, that passed through empires and dark ages, through the entire span of recorded history to arrive here now, connecting you directly to the ancient past through the physics of light and distance. Through the actual physical continuity of the universe that is all one thing, all connected, all part of a single seamless whole that has been unfolding since the beginning of time, and will continue unfolding long after your individual life has ended. The cosmos that contains and transcends all individual lives, all civilizations, all worlds, the vast eternal context within which everything temporary occurs, the permanent background against which all changes play out, the ground of being that supports and enables all that exists. The legacy of Mesopotamian civilization can be traced through all the cultures that followed, through the Persians who conquered Babylon and absorbed Babylonian learning, through the Greeks who studied in Babylonian schools and borrowed Babylonian astronomy and mathematics, through the Arabs who preserved and translated ancient texts during the medieval period when Europe had forgotten its classical heritage, through the continuous thread of influence and inheritance that connects us still to those early days when humans first learned to write and calculate, to observe the heavens systematically, to create urban civilization with all its benefits and costs, its opportunities and challenges, its potential for both tremendous good and terrible evil, for liberation and oppression, for the elevation of human existence above mere survival and its corruption into systems of exploitation and domination. We are still working out the possibilities inherent in civilization, still learning to use the tools we have inherited, still trying to create societies that maximize human flourishing while minimizing human suffering, still struggling with questions of justice and meaning that the ancient Sumerians also struggled with, still looking to the heavens for guidance and meaning, still telling stories to make sense of our experience, still creating beauty and meaning out of the raw materials of existence, still hoping for transcendence, still longing for connection with something greater than ourselves, still seeking the wisdom that will allow us to live well and die peacefully when our time comes. Sleep now, dear listener. Let these ancient stories fade into the background of your awareness. Let them become part of your dreams. Let them work on you in ways that your conscious mind cannot track or understand. Let them plant seeds that will germinate in their own time, that will grow and flower when the conditions are right, that will bear fruit you cannot now imagine but that will nourish you in ways you need. Trust in the wisdom of the ages that has been transmitted to you tonight through these words and images. Trust in your own deep knowing that recognizes truth, even when it comes dressed in myth and legend. Trust in the process of sleep and dream that heals and integrates, that processes and transforms, that prepares you for another day of living in this beautiful and terrible world that we have inherited from all who came before, that we will pass on to all who come after, that we hold in trust for the brief moment of our lives, stewards of existence, participants in the great mystery, beloved children of the cosmos, connected to the Anunnaki through the bloodline of consciousness itself, through the gift of awareness that makes us human, that makes us capable of wonder and love, of creativity and compassion, of finding meaning in the midst of chaos, of creating order out of confusion, of building beauty from raw materials, of loving in the face of loss, of hoping despite disappointment, of continuing to seek truth and wisdom and peace, of never giving up on the possibility that things can be better, that we can learn and grow, that we can become more than we are, that the potential planted in us by the gods, or by evolution, or by whatever forces shaped us can still unfold, can still develop, can still reach toward realization, completing the circle that began so long ago when the first humans opened their eyes and saw the world and understood that they were seeing it, that they existed, that they were here, that they were alive, that they were part of something vast and magnificent and mysterious, that they belonged to the universe, and the universe belonged to them, that there was no separation, only the illusion of separation, only the temporary forgetting that makes existence dramatic and interesting, that will eventually be healed in the great remembering, the return to source, the completion of the journey that is both outward into manifestation and inward toward essence, both down into matter and up into spirit, both into time and beyond time, both as individual and as part of the whole, both asleep and awake, both human and divine. Both mortal and eternal, both exactly what you are right now in this moment and also infinitely more, both limited and unlimited, both bounded and boundless, both beginning and ending, and also never beginning and never ending, both the wave and the ocean, both the story and the storyteller, both the dreamer and the dream, both searching and already arrived, both lost and found, both broken and whole, both perfectly imperfect and imperfectly perfect, both struggling and at peace, both needing healing and already complete, both becoming and being, both seeking and resting, both question and answer, both journey and destination, both means and end, both process and goal, both effort and effortlessness, both doing and being done unto, both active and receptive, both giving and receiving, both speaking and listening, both teaching and learning, both leading and following, both creating and discovering, both making meaning and finding meaning, both constructing reality and surrendering to reality, both hoping and accepting, both planning and flowing, both controlling and releasing, both holding on and letting go, both remembering and forgetting, both waking and sleeping, sleeping and dreaming, dreaming and resting, resting and healing, healing and renewing, renewing and beginning again, beginning the cycle once more, the eternal return, the circle that never breaks, the wheel that keeps turning, the river that keeps flowing, the breath that keeps breathing in and out, slower and slower, gentler and gentler, quieter and quieter, softer and softer, deeper and deeper, darker and darker, stiller and stiller, calmer and calmer, more peaceful and more peaceful, more relaxed and more relaxed, more distant and more distant, fading and fading and fading and fading into the gentle darkness of sleep, into the welcoming arms of night, into the nurturing embrace of unconsciousness, into the healing waters of rest, into the timeless space of dreams, into the eternal now of deep sleep, into peace, into silence, into stillness, into the void that is not empty but full, into the darkness that is not absence but presence, into the nothing that contains everything, into the sleep that restores and renews, that prepares you for tomorrow, that heals what needs healing, that integrates what needs integrating, that processes what needs processing, that releases what needs releasing, that holds what needs holding, that does its work in silence and darkness while you rest, while you float in the ocean of being, while you dissolve into the night, while you become one with the stars and the rivers, with the ancient gods and the first humans, with all that has been and all that will be, with the eternal now that is the only moment that ever truly exists, with the presence that is always here, with the peace that surpasses understanding, with the love that holds all things, with the light that shines in the darkness, with the darkness that is not opposed to light but is simply its complement, its partner, its other half, both necessary, both good, both sacred, both to be honoured and welcomed, both part of the great unity that encompasses all duality, all opposition, all contrast, all difference, gathering everything into its infinite embrace, excluding nothing, rejecting no one. Holding all with equal tenderness and care, the Divine Mother, the Cosmic Father, the Sacred Child, the Holy Family of existence itself, the Trinity that is unity, the one that is many, the many that are one, the all that is nothing and the nothing that is all, beyond words and concepts, beyond thought and feeling, beyond knowing and not knowing, beyond everything and nothing, just this, just now, just breath, just being, just sleep, just peace, just rest, just letting go, letting go, letting go completely and fully and totally and absolutely, surrendering to sleep, to night, to dreams, to the journey that continues even as the body rests, to the adventure that unfolds in inner space while outer space waits patiently for your return, to the healing darkness that asks nothing and gives everything, that requires no effort and rewards with restoration, that simply holds you as a mother holds her sleeping child, with infinite gentleness and patience, with eternal love and care, rocking you slowly in ancient rhythms older than time, singing softly songs without words, blessing you with peace beyond measure, wrapping you in comfort beyond description, keeping you safe through the night, guarding your sleep and your dreams, watching over you from the starry heights, the Anunnaki and all the gods, all the ancestors and spirits, all the helpers and guides, all the forces and powers that work for good, all the love that has ever been, surrounding you and protecting you and blessing you and wishing you well, wishing you rest, wishing you peace, wishing you gentle dreams and deep sleep, wishing you healing and renewal, wishing you all good things, now and always, tonight and every night, today and every day, in this moment and in every moment, forever and ever, eternally and infinitely, without end. Amen. 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 Blessed be. Blessed be. Blessed be. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. Sleep peacefully. Sleep gently. Sleep soundly. Sleep safely. Sleep sweetly. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night.